Welcome to White Guys for Kamala. I'm John Ennis. I'm here with my co-host Morley. Our guest this week is Sonali Kolhatkar, and we will be talking about um, the Kamala campaign, the uh, the continuing devolution of the Trump campaign, and other important issues right now. So, welcome, Sonali. Thank you for being here, and Morley. Thank you for hanging out as long as we have. So,
Always.
um, our opening thought this week will be entitlement. I was just communicating with a woman online, and she was talking about all the different ways that she'd like to be able to feel safe crossing the street or sharing something with a neighbor and not expecting, that he'll be harassing her, that she'd like to be able to be nice to a client at work without that person trying to corner them and say, why don't you like me? And I thought about how that really comes down to entitlement, and that really is probably one of the men's biggest flaws is the sense of entitlement. And it's also a much bigger idea because entitlement is something that feeds into colonization and invasion. And, we're on top of a very painful anniversary this week. And so the idea of what people feel entitled to and feel entitled to doing, it really seems like there's no way that it's not going to be toxic. Some characteristics of entitled people include feeling that they deserve recognition, rewards, good grades, or a promotion, seeing only their needs as important, feeling that the rules don't apply to them, interpreting constructive feedback as a personal attack, and believing that they can do no wrong. I think entitlement is inherently a narcissistic personality trait, um, which is different than if you're, say, entitled to something, such as like he's entitled to a full refund because the mistake was the company's fault, that kind of thing. But I think there's a sense of ego and probably overcompensating for some sense of, well, I don't get everything I want, so I'm entitled to this. I think it starts that way as, in men's minds. And uh, there has to be in that mindset, you're looking down at others in some way. You're trying to inherently prop yourself up. So I'm curious about what entitlement means to you guys.
Well, as much as I want to defer to the woman in this case, I'll at least speak up really quickly and say, for me, I think that my cat is entitled to make her voice be known. For me, I think entitlement has to do with the idea that what a person has always come to expect as theirs. It's how do I say this exactly? As much as I feel like entitlement is part of narcissism, I think it's also something that is often bred into bred into us as white men. I think it's something that we often grow up in and we don't even realize that it's there because I think we're so used to sort of the status quo. And I think that so often what we see when we see people saying like, well, I'm upset and bothered by the fact that, you know, right now there's more of an emphasis on diversity and there's more of an emphasis on helping people who have traditionally been looked over get a moment to have some equal rights. Oftentimes I think that is seen by the entitled as being like, well, that's taking away from me when it's not. It's just creating equality, you know. And so for me, I think that it's a as much as I would love to just think of it as a narcissistic thing, I think it's also something that is, within Americans and within, white people and then within white males. I think it's so sort of sewn into our DNA and our history. Even obviously, like you referenced, the beginning of this country being created with this idea of manifest destiny and all these ideas of what we are entitled to just by being born who we are. And I find that obviously is something that it requires so much work to undo. It's that first being made aware of it and then understanding how to try and remove that from your life.
Hmm. Hmm.
What do you think?
Um, I mean, I think when we use the word entitlement, we usually tr it's a way to make visible privilege, right? When we cast something in terms of entitlement, it's a language, it creates a narrative that helps one understand something as a privilege. So often, when we make privilege visible, we can cast it as an entitlement. And I think it's so interesting that Republicans in particular have used that word to describe government earned benefits, such as Social Security and Medicare. They refer to them as entitlement programs, and unfortunately, many in our corporate media have absorbed that and internalized that language as well. And instead of us thinking of these things as our rights, the things that we've paid towards, they're seen as something that you have to sort of deserve, be good enough to deserve, when, of course, these are things we've all paid into. And so the word entitlement can be used, ought to be used, of course, as a pejorative. It is a pejorative, um, to make visible privilege, but sometimes it can also be used as a label to term something a privilege when it's a right. So it's an interesting word.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's something that as men, particularly white men, it's probably a good place to be checking yourself whenever you can. It's reflexive for women. When they go outdoors for the day, they have to look out for some man feeling entitled to talk down to them, to comment on their appearance, feeling like they have the right to tell them to smile.
Right.
Um,
I mean, if
it's just
it
really
goes
touching.
obviously in that age old thing of, on a date, men are afraid of being laughed at and women are afraid of being murdered. I think that it's interesting. I was thinking about, the movie Joker because the sequel just came out. And I remember when I saw the first one, I was kind of conflicted because for me, that film, obviously deals with as the SNL joke talks about the white male rage, and so often I find that there are these, pieces of pop culture that reference this idea of like, oh, this man has been, unfairly trampled on, and that's sort of that film is kind of hit from his perspective of like everybody's mean to him, everyone's kind of cruel, and so he then rises up, and I think a lot of people think they can relate to that, but they can't actually. Like, this idea, it's this incel, or what is it called, where a person is like involuntary celibate,
Yep.
this idea that like you are owed, attractive women, throwing themselves at you. That's something that's like a part of you, who you are as a man. You don't have to earn someone's, affection. You just should be given it, And so for me, I find that when you see situations like that, and so often it's in men, but you see it obviously in women too, in the prototype of like Karen, and you see this idea of like this is how things are supposed to be, and oftentimes I think it becomes at the expense of other people. It's not even just like, oh, I'm entitled to being wealthy. It's like, no, I'm entitled to other people treating me a certain way. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So that's sort
Yeah.
of the kinds of stuff that pops up in my head when I think about entitlement.
Yeah, and that was Melissa Villaseñor who had the song about white male rage.
Right.
And interestingly, I just saw a video of her talking about why she left SNL, and a lot of it had to do with the social media backlash that she was feeling and the sort of pressure and realizing that she wasn't going to be enough and that it wasn't ever going to go away and she wasn't going to get that kind of approval ultimately. So,
Right.
um, and it's interesting you bring up Karen, the Karen phenomenon, the Karen videos. It finally occurred to me when we're watching a woman act out like that, a lot of the times, I think, it has to do with like she knows her place in the patriarchy. She's in some way played by the rules. And in this instance, she's losing her cool because there's the pent up aggression and resentment, but like this was how it was supposed to be. You're supposed to be listening to me now because of my place in the hierarchy. And that's the sort of breakdown that we're seeing. And it's kind of sad. And it's it speaks to so much more than just someone like expecting better service in a salon or something.
Right.
So but speaking of entitlement, when we talked about these narcissistic issues, all of them could be applied to Trump, but this is just a recent one where he was asked about how he would restore a sense of fairness to the Justice Department.
How will you restore faith in our justice system? A lot of people will say, well, he's just going to do to them what they did to him and get back at them.
A lot of people say that's what should happen.
Well,
you want to know the truth.
Right. Well, but I think
I'm continually struck by how much he runs on white male entitlement and how much that seems to be enough for his supporters. It's, that's what he's talking about when he says make America great again is centering white male demands and people falling in line like that. Um, Sonali, what do you think of the outlook for our justice system in light of something like this?
Oh, our justice system? Do you mean in terms of being able to hold someone like him accountable for the crimes he's committed, or just his in general sense of
Well,
entitlement?
this is what we're going against. And, isn't it? Yeah, I think you're right in that it's, we should be able to focus on all the crimes he's committed and be discussing and putting that front and center. But for some reason,
Yeah.
he's just got this huge crowd of supporters that are like, no, who
Well,
cares about
you
all
know,
the convictions?
I like to think of Trump more as a phenomenon than as a person, because I think it's really important for us to see that Trump's popularity is possible because of the systemic issues in this country. And I don't mean by that, I don't mean that they've always been there and therefore he is just, a small cog. I mean, he's definitely whipped it up, and there's a power that a narrative power that a demagogue has to certainly whip up a frenzy where there may not be that much, but he is a phenomenon. And when his supporters celebrate him for his narcissism and an entitlement and sense of privilege, what they're really doing is projecting their own needs and desires from that. So it's really, to see Trump beat a woman of color or beat the system or beat the tax the taxes he owes, or beat a lawsuit, it gives them a sense of vindication that he is a stand-in for them, right? He is a stand-in for the voiceless masses of Americans in their mind. This is how they view it, who are finally, seeing some sense of satisfaction. And I think this really goes back to the worldview, the story that conservative white America, enraged conservative white America has about itself is that here is this great country, or this country that was once great, that had the strongest military in the world, the wealthiest nation in the world, all of these superlatives to describe this amazing nation. And then Black people started cutting in line, and immigrants started cutting in line, and the line got longer and longer, and suddenly they weren't able to access the same things that they could. This is their view of it. And so the more restrictions they can place on everybody but them, who are the entitled, the worthy, the better they feel about it. And here comes Trump breaking all the rules, breaking all the boundaries, breaking all the ethical concerns, because he is their stand-in to say the country should go back to the way it was when we were in charge and when we didn't have to struggle as much. And it gives them a sense of satisfaction, I think. So unfortunately, pointing out Trump's ethical violations, pointing out his lies, has the opposite effect, right? Like we often have thought, and this was a big problem that the mainstream media just didn't see in 2015 when he first burst into the scene. They treated him like any other candidate, and they thought if they just fact check him enough, his supporters will leave, because who wants to back a liar? And of course, over and over again for years now, we've seen that none of that matters. The fact checking is precisely like the wrong thing to try to do if you want to counter the hold he has on his people. It isn't about fact checking. It's about demagoguery, and it's about we are actually on the verge of what I really feel we need to start identifying, which is a mass campaign of ethnic cleansing. Every moment that the Trump-Vance ticket can pivot to scapegoating immigrants, they do so. Every moment that they can use Hitlerian language to demonize immigrants, they do so. In talking about poisoning the blood of this nation, recently Trump just said something about it's in their genes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that dehumanization, that is step one in genocide and ethnic cleansing. And any genocide you look at, step one is to dehumanize another and otherize and scapegoat another. And so that's the sort of the end point of this, or I should say the beginning of the end point of this horrific project of Trumpism. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely the sense of pride and excitement that his followers feel when they see him flout the rules.
Yeah. I wonder, to me, it feels like there's been kind of two camps. There's the people that believe that he's done these things, but don't think it matters. They're like, well, it's taxes. Who cares about taxes? And like he's even said, like smart people are good at avoiding paying taxes. And then there's the people who genuinely just, if he says he didn't do it, they say he didn't do it. And so in their eyes, they think, well, he's been unfairly persecuted. The only way to get, justification now is to persecute back, or to, if you're crazy enough, to sort of clean the deep state out or whatever. But, I find it fascinating, just this idea that those two people, kind of that don't believe and that don't cares, kind of can coexist together so easily. That the people that, that don't believe he did anything wrong don't ever say like, well, I mean, but he did do these things, like, like they did, I mean, it's crazy to me, the stuff that he floats as possible alternatives to when he's even cornered in any sort of way. I mean, there was a time when he genuinely said, I think they may have faked the Access Hollywood tape. He's
Right.
Like, I don't remember saying that. They could have faked it. They could have made my voice, and I don't think that, I think that was kind of like a bridge too far in terms of plausibility, but he still floated it. And I'm sure there are some people that do believe that was faked,
Yeah, I mean, and he'll randomly start talking about Hannibal Lecter in his speeches, and his hardcore supporters brush it off. And I think we also need to look at it as it's a psychology of a cult, right? When you have cult members who have kind of invested themselves emotionally in their leader, they develop a cognitive dissonance almost as a way to sort of emotionally survive and to really feel committed. And I think the hope in looking at it in that way is that eventually, given enough people who care about them, cult members often tend to leave their cults after, one fact after another building up in their brains, where they tuck away this thing that doesn't feel right, and they tuck it away and they tuck it away, and eventually the dam bursts and they go, oh my God, I've just been fooled for so long, and I see the light and I need to step away. And I think that there is a way out of this morass, because the mental adherence that Trump has over his supporters is only as strong as his ability to keep speaking and his ability to keep having his hold on them. The election gives him oxygen. Right. And if the country can survive this election and survive him being through this election, he's not running again. He said so as well. We might, this election has a lot depending on it.
I thought for sure that when we defeated him the first time, that he would fade into obscurity and just pop up every once in a while when he was selling, his ridiculous products on QVC or whatever.
I mean, he temporarily did, right? And we got a sense of, we got a little taste of freedom from Trump for a couple of years.
Right. And I will say, I genuinely thought that January 6th was going to be enough to sort of break that kind of stranglehold and kick some sense into people. It started to. And then I think, it made me wonder. We had a guest on a couple of weeks ago that was talking about how, he believed that the solution was to just not look. It's just like, if you stop giving, as you say, oxygen to him, it will eventually fade his hold on these people. But I also wonder if in some ways there has to be an alternative, because I feel like one of the big failings of this last election cycle was to not find someone else that could kind of not out Trump, but just be an alternative. Like, and to me, maybe perhaps the one good thing about a moderately successful debate performance from JD Vance was at least like, well, in some ways we do need an alternative. I'm not saying I want JD Vance.
Yeah, I don't know. I disagree, because
great,
JD Vance is JD Vance put lipstick on a pig. JD Vance made Trump look good.
Eyeliner,
JD
if you will.
will say, yeah, exactly. He will, and he can and will say anything and everything to get power. I mean, we've seen that he's willing to say whatever he needs to. And he came across as legitimizing Trump in a way that was very dangerous. If anything, I think a smarter, younger Trump is scarier. And so I keep coming back to this. I would like to think of these as phenomena, right? There's the Trump phenomena, and JD Vance is part of that. And to counter the Trump phenomena, I think it's important for us to not just attack him as a person and then just put up another person as a counterpoint to him, because in the end, it'll all come down to the failings of that other person. And as a progressive journalist, I want to sweep all of that away and say, what is the world that we want? And who is willing to give us that world? And what are we willing to do to ensure we get that world from whoever wants to give it to us? These are our demands. And so, for example, you see the New York Times. After Biden's disastrous debate performance, the New York Times was single-minded in its decision to see Biden be replaced by anybody. I think they preferred other people besides Kamala Harris. And they've been single-minded in ensuring Trump doesn't win. Every other day there's an op-ed about how Trump is an existential threat, right? Which also, by the way, goes to show that what the New York Times wants, the New York Times will get. I mean, they will speak out when they really want to speak out. I mean, genocides and climate change be damned, but when they want something, they'll go out and be single-minded on it. However, what they have done, and you might disagree with me on this, I think it is a mistake to uphold another person, another individual, as the antidote to Trump. And so, because it's far too easy to say, if Kamala Harris is the answer to Trump, here's all the ways in which she is a flawed candidate. And it's far too easy to turn this into a popularity contest. And it cannot and should not be about that. That's not what elections should be about. They cannot be about individual politicians. I know it's important for us to get people excited about a candidate, but all you have to do, all that happens is when you say Kamala Harris is the candidate that I want, who's gonna beat Trump. You have a whole bunch of people who have a lot of morality on their side who's saying, but she's allowing a genocide, but she's not she's not speaking out strongly enough on climate change. What's her economic policies and opportunity agenda? Why is she so afraid of going, backing single payer healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, I think when we do that, we tend to break up into these little camps, these little competitions. I'm with her, I'm with him. It's not about any of them. They are public servants. They have to earn our vote. Elections are not about popularity contests. Our vote shouldn't be a love letter. It needs to be a chess move. If we write love letters to our candidates in the form of votes, our hearts are going to get broken, and they do over and over again. And that leads to disillusionment, disengagement, and apathy. So to a very long answer to your question, I really think it's important that when we counter Trumpism, it should be about countering the phenomenon. What does Trumpism represent? And what is the world that we want that's in counter to Trumpism? And then really wholeheartedly embrace that. And who's going to deliver that? And whoever is willing to deliver that, that is who may get our vote. And that they'll get it that one time, and then they have to keep earning it.
Yeah.
I think it's so well said. I do wonder, though, in the sense that, like, what needs to be earned on one side is just so freely given on the other. So
Mhm.
like the Democrats, they, and this is similar to what our friend Christian said the other week, was like they have to juggle so many balls in the air. They have to get, again, like white women, women of color, men of color, all these different, like young people. They have to get all these people to show up, and all Republicans have to do is just say we're like vote Republican, and if they get the Republicans and MAGA, then they can win. And so for me, I feel like while what I think you said is absolutely right, and I think is how it should be for sure. For me, it becomes difficult, as you say, like if it is a chess move, to not just be like, why is it that they have to do so little chess maneuvering and we have to do so much,
Well, I mean, I think the Democrats shouldn't be trying to break us up into little bits and pieces. They shouldn't be trying to like, how do we win the black vote? How do we win where are your policies? Espouse the policies that are the most popular and watch people flock to you, right? People want relief from climate change. They want climate justice. People want populist economic policies. They want to tax the rich. Those are all really, really popular. And now, whenever we have discussions like this, one thing we have to keep reminding ourselves is that the reason our elections are such a mess and that we can't get into these conversations is because of the Electoral College. It is precisely because of the fact that Democrats and Republicans are trying to win over small slivers of undecided voters in a handful of states instead of actually winning the popular vote. Because if they needed to win just the popular vote to win, they would enact and they would back popular measures. But Electoral College has pushed our politics rightward. That's where the whole conversation around third-party candidates comes in as well. We wouldn't have this conversation around spoilers if we didn't have the Electoral College, because then it would be a purely popular vote. And third parties would come in third, unless they were so popular and powerful that they would push aside the big parties, in which case we'd all cheer. So the Electoral College over and over, this was a racist, exclusionary institution that turned a representative democracy at birth into a proxy democracy. It is a proxy democracy when it comes to choosing the president. We don't have a representative democracy. We have a proxy democracy. And we have to talk about that. And there are people doing stuff about it, but you don't hear much about it in the papers.
Yeah. Well, speaking about to what you were saying about how, we can't just say Kamala Harris is the alternative to Trump, do that. It's been interesting to watch her messaging as the compare and contrast approach, particularly in light of the hurricane and the coverage that's been going on. There's been so much misinformation, and it's actually really shocking that in the closing month of the campaign, that all the Trump campaign had planned was to just keep lying about current events. And it's been interesting to see how much when they go on TV to try to repeat these debunked claims, it really makes reporters mad that, when you're lying about stuff they've reported on. It's one thing when it's spin. It's another thing when they're saying like, oh, there's no rescue operations underway. And they're like, I've covered them. We're hearing them. People are being pulled out of their houses and people are dying.
And this may be too far. I mean, Trump may push people in North Carolina and Georgia, which are swing states, too far.
Yeah.
I mean, to have Brian Kemp defend Democrats, that's quite an achievement.
It is, and especially in the last 30 days of the election, it's pretty striking. So I wanted to show this clip that the Harris campaign just posted, which does a good job of showing, when it comes down to like, what are the issues? What do we care about? What's a responsible leader?
We have mobilized more than 1,500 federal personnel. We have food, water, and generators that are ready for deployment. Today, I'm also announcing that the president has approved the governor's request for 100% federal reimbursement of local costs.
Someone drew on an extra part very clumsily there to make it appear as if Alabama might also be in the storm's path, which it wasn't.
The president suggested bombing a hurricane on multiple occasions. Briefers reportedly told the president, we'll look into that.
We will continue to do everything we can to help you recover and to help you rebuild, no matter how long it takes.
This is a tough hurricane, one of the wettest we've ever seen from the standpoint of water.
So I think that's playing internet hardball.
Yeah. For me, it's hard. I mean, I have friends that are in North Carolina and they're dealing with the fallout from this insane weather situation. And, for me, it's one of those really challenging things of when you're in a situation where it's obviously terrible, you start just saying, okay, who can I blame in this situation? And it's so easy, obviously, for Trump to be like, yeah, blame the people that are in charge, like blame. I mean, obviously now you even have Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, yes, they can control the weather. I mean, I struggle with, this idea that just all you need to create is chaos. And that seems to be what Trump's angle is. It's just create enough chaos. And then just all you have to say is like, hey, I'm an alternative to chaos, even though you're the one who sowed it. You know what I mean? But it seems to work so well for him. I mean, I think what I keep coming back to in this conversation is just this idea that, like, why is sanity such a, requirement for us to have when insanity seems to work and it's still like a dead heat. You know what I mean? Like, what is it going to take for the world to all get on the same page as far as just the very basic, simple things,
I mean,
Yeah.
he's only in a dead heat again because of the Electoral College. It's close
Yes.
because of the Electoral College.
Yeah.
He's
It's not
he
reality.
yeah, and that's really important for us to keep reminding ourselves, because it's like, wait a minute, how is this even possible? But I do think that another reason why it is that close is because, unfortunately, Kamala Harris is losing voters in Michigan over the genocide in Gaza. There was just a piece in the New York Times today about how she's losing Arab and Muslim voters in Michigan. On this terrible anniversary of the 1 year of the Hamas attacks on Israel and the start of the Israel genocide, you're seeing these stories that are in the mainstream media that are still very skewed. And yet through that noise, through that pro-Israel bias that is rife in our media, you're seeing a story about how she's in big trouble. So because of the Gaza thing. And I sympathize with her because, of course, she's part of an administration that has dug its heels in. Biden is the one who's refused to budge on Netanyahu. Even though had he continued to run as president, he would have clearly lost. And there's nothing left for him to lose. And there's the threat of AIPAC. In spite of all of this, of course, to demand that she do something about it does put her in a tough position. However, to unequivocally continue to back Israel is losing her votes. And she needs to do more at the risk of the attacks from AIPAC.
Do you mean losing her votes in the sense that they're going to Trump? Because I will say I have friends that are saying I refuse to vote for her because of the genocide. And to that, my question is just how many more lives are going to be lost if Donald Trump regains power?
I totally agree with you that Trump would have handed Netanyahu the nuclear bombs to drop on Gaza, right? But that's telling people a what if. And it's also saying that right now, the 140,000 Palestinian dead is not a deal breaker, right? It's really hard to say your refusal to vote for Kamala is going to translate into something much worse, because once she's in power, they have even less power. Once she's in the White House, they have even less power over her. So who holds the power in the situation?
Wouldn't you say that, like, because I mean, I remember having the argument with people saying they're not going to overturn Roe v. Wade. So, like, don't worry. I know we're all freaked out about that, but they won't do it. And I was wrong. And to me, it seems as though the idea of the what if we've already proved that the what if happens all the time.
Then, the counter to your example is that Democrats had power in all three houses at a point when they could have legislated the federal right to an abortion, and they didn't, right? They didn't. And so there's always, the Democrats are never as competent and moral and ethical as we want them to be. Over and over again, they disappoint us. So it becomes really easy to say, well, why should we keep backing them? And I'm trying to come at it from the perspective of what I see other people, voting. Now, I live in California. I don't have to make that calculation, which kind of sucks because that means that my vote just counts so little compared to the vote of somebody in Michigan or North Carolina. However, it also protects me from having to make that hard decision. But if we didn't have the Electoral College, not only would my vote count as much, we would have a popular vote. So I keep coming back to the Electoral College, which has made our country less democratic, which has helped create a situation where we're talking about a genocide not being a deal breaker, and it's terrible.
Right.
Absolutely. But I will say, don't you think that sort of focusing so much on the agreeably frustrating situation with the Electoral College is its own kind of what if? This idea of so many friends of mine that are not voting for Kamala, they're like, well, something needs to happen where I can make my statement and my point. And I would just say, for me, it seems as though a vote for Kamala, even though everything you've said is, I think, absolutely true, is still a vote to save more lives in Gaza. To me, in the same way that a vote for Hillary Clinton would have been a vote for saving Roe v. Wade.
And she won the popular election. I mean, she did, right? So, it's not my job as a journalist to convince people to to vote for this or that. I really think that we have to go into this election with our eyes open. We have to make the right chess move with the little power that we have. And between elections, we have to work to hold not only politicians accountable, but to hold the system accountable. And that includes the Electoral College. It includes a system that privileges billionaires over the rest of us. And so I think it is really, really important that voters in those swing states understand what their choices are and understand the consequences of their vote. But at the same time, we can't condescend to them and we can't whip them into, the only people who have power over their votes are voters. It's the job of the candidates to convince them to give them their votes. So I would ask Kamala Harris, what are you doing about this really scary thing that is causing you to lose votes in these swing states? What are you going to do about this? Please do something about this for all our sakes, right?
Sure.
So
now, and as someone who has voted Green in the past, to go the other way, I mean, I think if you're going to vote for a party or try to abstain for a party and expecting change, I think, you still deserve results from the party you're voting for, and having voted Green more than once, I'm still waiting for the results for those times I voted, I'm still waiting for something to show from that, besides just the fact that the only time they seem to show up is on a ballot when there's other people advertising that election. Here's a clip of Jill Stein, as far as the vaulted moralistic choice, this is her minimizing January 6th on a MAGA podcast.
The next question I have here is about January 6th. I'm going to read it because it's kind of a loaded question. Protesters from January 6th have received a combined total of nearly 850 years worth of prison sentences. Individuals like Zach Reel, Joe Biggs, Stuart Rhodes, and Enrique Otario received the longest sentences, ranging from 15 to 22 years. Those are longer than the 4 people who got term sentences at the Nuremberg trials. So my question for you is, why should they serve longer sentences than actual Nazis? And as president, would you commute or not, if not completely pardon all nonviolent January 6 protesters? That's kind of a loaded question there.
Yeah, I guess I would have to look more carefully at their actual charges. When I look at January 6th, it was dangerous. People broke laws. They should be held accountable for breaking laws. But whether the sentences were reasonable, I would have to dive more into the weeds than I have done. In the big scheme, I see a lot around January 6th as being blown up for political reasons.
And then here's one of her appearances where she has supporters behind her with signs saying, "Abandon Harris, 24." There's nothing about abandon Trump, abandon the two-party system, vote your conscience. It seems that she's very made a concerted effort. And this is someone whom I have really appreciated in the past, Shama Sawant, who had just been urging people specifically to deny Kamala Harris the state of Michigan.
To get active, we need to be clear about what our goals are. We are not in a position to win the White House, but we do have a real opportunity to win something historic. We could deny Kamala Harris the state of Michigan. And the polls show that most likely Harris cannot win the election without Michigan.
I see a lot of purposely trying to pin the vice president for policies that she doesn't control necessarily from this candidacy. And I wanted to ask you, Sonali, about you've been covering Project 2025 and you've been discussing Progress 2025, which is the solution or the antidote, if you will. There are bigger stakes outside of this war, and there's only more wars that could be coming from it. And so I wanted to hear from you about what you've been covering, about what Project 2025 will mean for all Americans, and what our hopes are to try to compete with that sort of long-term vision.
I've heard so many different folks talk about Project 2025 in different ways. You have folks on the right who realize that it's terribly scary, say, "Oh, it's really not that big a deal." Trump himself minimizing it, and then folks on the left who are saying, "Oh, you're blowing it up too much. You're fear mongering, using this presidential transition 922-page presidential transition plan as a bludgeon to force people to vote for Democrats." And again, I keep coming back to the fact that we have a situation where a major party candidate has received backing and funding from an organization, an extremist right-wing organization. Hundreds of his former advisors work in this organization that have a plan to have him basically oversee the dismantling of the federal government and the dismantling of the social safety net, the dismantling of the education department and the labor undermining of the National Labor Relations Board and the dismantling of Medicare, and having this be shrugged off as not very realistic. However, when Trump was in power for 4 years, he made very clear that he was going to do exactly this kind of thing. And so instead of journalists like myself, progressive activists like the ones that I work with saying Kamala Harris will ensure that Project 2025 will never come to light, instead of saying that, because of course we have no guarantee that what any president is going to do. We have no guarantee that she would necessarily not do any of the things that Project 2025 does. We have put out the solutions to the problems in this country. And to articulate the agenda is a first step to demanding, well, what are you going to do about it? What is it that we want? First of all, what is it that we want? We know what we don't want. We don't want to lose Medicare. We don't want the Department of Education to be dismantled and destroyed. We don't want the privileging of Christian national fundamentalism. We don't want attacks on gender identity issues and queer folks in the queer community. We don't want an undermining of people of color. That's what we don't want. Okay, so what do we want? And in Progress 2025, we take 10. This is a project of Yes Magazine that I'm so proud of, a small and but mighty team of entirely, by the way, women, people of color, LGBTQ folks. That is how Yes is right now. Our staffing is incredibly diverse. We created this project where we looked at the 10 categories that Project 2025 identifies, such as labor and capital, education, healthcare, LGBTQ rights, etc., reproductive rights. And we looked at what it is that we want, and we started articulating the things that we want. Oh, you want to shut down the Department of Public Education? We want K through 12 to be not only free, but we want higher education to be free and paid for by taxes. You want to gut Medicare? We want Medicare for all. You want to ban books in schools and threaten the safety of queer kids and Black and brown kids. We want secularism in our schools. Here's all of the things that we want, and articulating. You want to put more cops in the streets? We want to abolish police. You want to privilege billionaires? We want reparations for Black people, right? We want no billionaires to exist. We want billionaires taxed out of existence. Articulating that framework is something that we just don't see often enough on the left. And this is why we've done it. And this is what we want any future candidate to adhere to see as the gold standard for what they need to do to earn our votes. And if Kamala Harris wants to be elected, here's a list of all the things that we want from her. And maybe she'll win, and maybe she'll get to do all of these things. She'll get the privilege of being our public servant, because that's what politicians are. They are our public servants. So I think it's really, really important for us to start articulating these ideas, these solutions, this vision for the world that we want. And people can find it all at progress2025.org. I really hope you check it out. This is a small, independent venture by an outlet that for nearly 30 years has been covering solutions. We do solutions journalism, which is a much, much nicer way to look at the world than simply covering the problems of our world, which, is a fear-based way of being in the world. Lots of people are doing amazing things to fix our world, and we try to showcase how they do that.
That's great.
That's great. I think you're right on it. It's very interesting to me when you sort of step back and observe the way that the right works versus the way that the left works. It feels so often, I feel so often like a bystander that's just sort of like, oh, we just have to fix all of the things but meanwhile, the right gets to lay out these, long-term plans of like, this is how we're going to, affect the justice system. This is how we're going to affect, all the way up to the Supreme Court, and all these different, like, you see the sort of machinations of someone like Mitch McConnell going far back, and so oftentimes it feels like we're just sort of trying our best to kind of keep up and like fix little, put out little fires as they sprout up. But meanwhile, we're not taking a long goal. We're not setting up this idea of this is the ideal of what we want, in the same way that, I think it's great to have the alternative of a Project 2025 and saying, okay, well, if you guys are going to have these, like, dream vision board version of your politics, we should have the same idealism and the same ideas that we can put forward.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and here's the thing: the story of the right is a story based on fear. It's a story based on scapegoating vulnerable people and ignoring all of the ways in which the billionaires, are ruining things for us. It's a story that's based on what folks can lose. What is our story? What is the story of the things that we want? What is the story of the world that we are trying to build? In our world, in our future, there won't be back-to-back hurricanes devastating communities and leaving them underwater, because we will have, industrialized renewable energy and not be reliant on fossil fuels anymore, and hopefully brought the carbon, brought our carbon emissions under order. Our beautiful world will have more money into schools and libraries instead of police, and maybe we won't need police in our world. So these are the kinds of things that we have to keep reminding ourselves, because it is a very beautiful, seductive just world. And the more we talk about it, the more we might find that we have in common with a lot of the Trump folks, who, if you start to talk to them about nuts and bolts of their lives, I want to be able to afford a home. I want to be able to afford childcare. I want to be able to afford all of these things. We find that we have so much in common. And, Trump takes advantage of those desires. And the Democrats don't take enough advantage of the fact that there's this huge desire by manifesting better solutions.
Well said.
Yeah. So speaking of seeing just solutions, our white guy of the week, Judge Matthew Barrett. I don't know if you saw it or have been following it. I've been following the Tina Peters case for a while, and I watched this live. I didn't expect it to be quite so out of an Arthur Miller play, but this was his sentencing for her repeated efforts at fraud and cashing in on that fraud by sharing voting system software with people like Mike Lindell. So she was handed down 9 years. And so, but this was part of his powerful monologue calling her out. And it was so refreshing to see a judge actually square reality with the torrent of misinformation.
Lying to officers. It's happened multiple times. They're recorded conversations. It's just more lies. No objective person believes them. No, at the end of the day, you cared about the jets, the podcasts, and the people fawning over you. You abdicated your position as a servant to the Constitution, and you chose you over all else. Yes, you are a charlatan, and you cannot help but lie as easy it is for you to breathe. You betrayed your oath for no one other than you. And this is what makes Miss Peters such a danger to our community. It's the position she held that has provided her the pulpit from which she can preach these lies. The undermining of our democratic process, the undermining of the belief and confidence in our election systems. It's not about questioning it. No one says you can't question, you can't ask. It's completely different. And if you don't understand that distinction, then there's nothing I can say or do here today that will change your mind. So the damage that is caused and continue to be caused is just as bad, if not worse, than the physical violence that this court sees on an all too regular basis. And it's particularly damaging when those words come from someone who holds a position of influence like you. Every effort to undermine the integrity of our elections and public's trust in our institutions has been made by you. You've done it from that lectern the voting public provided you with. Everything you've done has been done to retain control, influence. The damage is immeasurable.
The damage is immeasurable. He said so many things in this, and he actually went off for about a half hour and before she was taken into jail. And I think a lot of people were so inspired by that just because, we have a Supreme Court that is continually rewriting reality around it just to support their, since they became the deep majority. We have a Supreme Court that's done everything they can with, while denying their own corruption to help the Republican candidate. It's not just a normal Republican candidate. It's one who is, already committed, a coup attempt, who is, on trial in 4 different states and is already a convicted felon. So to watch our judicial system become enthralled to a candidate that, is not playing with a full deck for one, and is not loyal to our country for another, has been, it's been so just distressing and depressing for a lot of us. I found that it's bad when Trump says something really terrible and offensive or tries to break the law or something like that, but it's a lot worse when the judicial system bends to accommodate him when he does it. It's one thing when he says a lie, it's another thing when the media tries to support it or justify it or minimize it somehow. And so this was such a serious reality check for especially Tina Peters, but the entire election denial movement. And I think something you both touched on earlier, were how these people are going along with it because this is what they're told. And she's someone who needed to try to proved that there was fraud in her county against Trump, even though Trump won her county. She was that much of a cash grab for her that she was like, okay, I'll just start, taking apart the county election system and giving it to Mike Lindell and other people, just to be able to raise a ruckus and then keep denying that this is what I'm doing, no matter how many times. And I'm just going to count on my privilege, which this judge called her out on. And so when we mention the white guy of the week on our podcast, it's usually someone who's done something of great distinction to go against the flow. And in this case, it's sad that a judge enforcing the law has to be such a role model.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I do wonder, what is it going to be on the other side of this? Like, when the Supreme Court has a ruling, it does, it becomes precedent, and so 10 years from now, this idea of like, oh, well, we're making these decisions now based on, a lot of things. What happens on the other side when it's not Trump they're talking about anymore?
Right. Yeah. So, okay. I just want to
defeat Trumpism and not just Trump.
That's right. That's right. So I just wanted to show a quick video that Morley did, his interview with Robbie Conal at the Subliminal Projects art show.
My personal mantra is apply what you do best to what you care about most. I like a little thing like democracy. I was brought up in New York in the 1950s, and both my parents were union organizers, so I have it in my blood. Even though I was a stone cold hippie and totally cosmic dude, I did come around. I came down to this. My parents were activists, union organizers in the 30s and 40s when that was kind of war between, the unions and big corporations. My parents, they figured out, I'm an only child, they figured out, oh, what, we have an arty kid, what are we going to do? Oh, you're an art, okay, Domye, Goya, the Mexican muralist, Jose Guadalupe Posada, great artists, who did art about social and political issues. When you're growing up like elementary school, you go to the park after school, or you have your violin lesson. My parents sent me to the major museums in New York City. Go hang out with Guernica, which happened to be resident there at the Modern, or go to the Met, and come back for dinner, love and solidarity, mom and dad. I never really got my political consciousness and my art practice together until Ronald Reagan. My first street poster was made from 4 little black and white nasty portraits of Ronald Reagan and his cabinet, men with no lips, because they were so unforthcoming about what they were doing to American democracy. When we get to these guys, it's already like, I don't have a choice. This is 14 plus Kamala. I have 80 of these, not inside my body. I have more inside my body, but in my studio in Los Osos, there are many, many, many. We just pick some of the baddest bad guys, put them in existential Trumpian frames like his gold toilet, and hopefully have Kamala blowing him away.
Morley, nice job. And Sonali, thank you so much for joining us this week. And we really appreciate what you're doing with Project 2025 and with Yes Magazine. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us about this crazy, crazy election.
Thank you so much. It was great to see Robbie Conal. I recall almost 2 decades ago postering with him and on the streets of LA way, way, way back during the Bush administration. So
wow.
He is an ally. He's a stalwart. And thank you so much. So check out yesmagazine.org and progress2025.org. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. And let's check your registration, everybody. It's coming down to it. So thanks again.